Alrighty-o. To wrap this up, we are going to do the last side of your notes, and there are a few examples that look a little bit different here, so it's important that you understand how to do these and to apply what you know about how to find the volume of a cylinder. Alright, let's continue on with a few more familiar examples. With number 5, go ahead and write down your formula for the volume, so how much stuff can we fill up the cylinder with. The volume of a cylinder, which is pi times the radius squared, so the radius multiplied by itself, times the height. Remember that the radius is halfway across the circle, that's what we need, and the diameter is all the way across. So if they give you the diameter, you have to cut that in half. And in this case, they have given us the diameter. They've said the diameter is 16 inches. So to figure out our radius, which is half of 16, or halfway across, think to yourself, all right, what's half of 16? Or divide that number by 2, and that would give you a radius of 8 inches. So I'm going to go ahead and write this on the side just so I remember that my radius is 8 inches and my height is actually the same thing. That doesn't always happen, but it did in this case. Remember, the height connects the bottom circle with the top circle. So when I plug in my formula with these numbers, I've got pi times 8 squared times the height, which is 8. Now, when I plug this in to my calculator, remember to multiply pi with everything else. So we have pi times 8 times 8 times 8. And you should get 1,608.5 inches cubed. Remember that volume is always cubed. Area is squared. Okay, nicely done. For number 6, it says if a cylinder has a diameter of 8 centimeters and a height of 10 centimeters, what is the volume? So here they've given you the dimensions that you just don't have a picture, so you have to read the word problem and then take out what you need from it. So let's go ahead and remind ourselves of what we need for volume. So we know to find volume we multiply pi times the radius squared times the height. Now read this carefully, because in this case he told you, or she told you I guess, the diameter is 8 centimeters. But we need the radius, which is half of the diameter. So think to yourself, what's half of 8? Yep, 4. So our radius is 4 centimeters, halfway across that circle. And the height, we don't have to do anything fancy with that. They've just told us the height, the distance from one circle to the next, is 10 centimeters. To plug this in, we have pi times the radius squared times the height, which is 10. Go ahead, take out your calculator. You should be on Desmos. If you don't have that, just grab one of the classroom calculators. That's fine too. And multiply all your numbers together, and we should get a number which is 502.7 centimeters cubed. If you got that, nice job. That means that you plugged in all of your numbers correctly. All right, for number 7, they tell you that a cylinder, there we go, has a radius of 4 centimeters and a height of 8 centimeters. What is the volume? So in this case, they have given you the radius, which is really nice. You don't have to do anything to get that radius. And they've said the height is also 8 centimeters. so when we plug this in, remember that the radius is halfway across the circle. That's what we need. Diameter is all the way across. We have the radius, so we're good to go. So the volume would be pi times the radius squared times the height, which is 8. When we plug that into your calculator, hopefully you guys have noticed that you can just leave pi on your calculator and erase everything else. We have pi times 16 times 8, which should give you 402.1 centimeters cubed. All right, for the last example for the day, this one I actually think is pretty fun. And it's kind of like you have to figure out something when it's not completely obvious. So we're going to talk about how we can do this. The first thing you need to do is change this to 1 meter. Change the radius to 1 meter. That was my fault. On the notes I wrote it as 2 meters, but it should be 1 meter. So go ahead and fix that. Okay, so the instructions are to find the height of the following cylinders. And then I wrote on the side, because you have to know this to be able to do this. They each have the same volume. Okay, so let's go ahead and see what we can do here. So we already know the height for number 9, yeah? And remember, the height is just the distance between the two circles. So the height for number 9 is 5 meters. And we also know the radius, which is 2 meters. Okay, I'm actually going to write that below just so you guys can see it a little bit better. The radius is 2 meters and the height is 5 meters. Okay, cool. Now for number 8, we do know that the radius is 1 meter, but the height we're not so sure about. They actually haven't told us anything about that cylinder's height. So you might think, okay, well, how in the world can we do this? Well, the key is knowing that each of the cylinders have the same volume. So I'm going to write a formula to help me come up with the height of that one cylinder. Goodness. Okay, so we know that the volume of cylinder 1, okay, we'll call this cylinder 1, equals the volume of cylinder 2. We'll call this one cylinder 2. We also know the formula for volume for 2 cylinders, no matter what. So let's go ahead and use that so that we can solve for something like height. So we know the volume for cylinder 1 is pi r squared times the height. And the volume for cylinder 2 is going to have the same formula. So pi r squared times the height. Okay, once we've got that figured out, we can actually go ahead and treat this like an equation where we draw a river, and we can solve by plugging in what we know to figure out what we don't know. So for our cylinder 1, we know the radius is 1 meter, and we know what pi is, but that's about all. So let's go ahead and fill in what we do know. So we have pi times 1 meter squared times the height. Okay, that's all we know so far. Now for the second cylinder, we actually have everything, which is great. So we have pi for the second cylinder times our radius, which is 2 meters squared, times the height, which is 5 meters. Okay, so basically we just plugged in everything that we know, and we set both cylinders volume equal to each other so that we can solve. So I'm going to go ahead and expand this out so you guys can see this a little better. So on the left we have pi times 1 meter squared, which is just 1 meter times 1 meter, and then we have times the height. And then on the right side, I have pi times 2 meters squared, so 2 meters times itself, times 5 meters. Okay, this is where it gets fun. I'm going to leave pi as just pi. I'm not going to multiply that out with everything else just because I want you guys to see how we can cancel pi out. So I'm going to start with simplifying my left side. 1 times 1 is 1, and meters times meters would just be meters squared. Then I have times pi times the height. Okay? Just simplify that. On the right side, I'm going to leave pi as itself, and I'm going to multiply 2 times 2 times 5, which is 20 meters. We are multiplying meters by itself 3 times. So that would be times 20 meters cubed. Okay, so now comes the fun part. We need to get this height all by itself. So we are going to solve this just like an equation. Notice that on the left, we are multiplying the height times 2 things. So we're just going to divide each side by those 2 things. So divide each side by 1 meter squared times pi to get the height by itself. And then we can just cancel things out. So on the left, meter squared divided by itself is 1. Pi divided by pi is 1, and we're left with h, which is the height, which is what we need. On the right side, pi divided by pi is 1. And we have 20 on top. And then, what's cool is that we have meters cubed and meters squared on the bottom. So to condense this exponent, remember that when we're dividing 2 exponents that have the same base, we just subtract our exponents. And 3 minus 2 is 1, so that would just be 20 meters to the first power, or just the height equals 20 meters. So that is how we solve for an unknown height. Great job. Your assignment, Mr. Doug will be handing out to you in a little bit. That will be due tomorrow in class. We will be checking a few of the questions, and I will also be checking to make sure that you completed it to the best of your ability. All right, I will see you guys tomorrow, and you will also turn in your DLD tomorrow.